everybody. Welcome back to Reacteria. It's the end of the year, and I want to finish strong by revisiting an old favorite of this series. That's right, it's the dynamic duo of dubious claims, the sinister siblings of science slander, the Batman and Robin of being wrong a lot. It's John and Jane, and today they're talking about whale evolution, which is a big deal in evolutionary biology. After all, the idea of a funky little land animal hopping into the water and slowly evolving into the largest animal in the entire world is a wild thing to think about, even if you know that it's true. And the sheer amount of evidence that we have for it is something that rubs creationists every kind of wrong way. So buckle in and get ready to have a whale of a good time watching two salty creationists try to harpoon evolution. That may actually be the dumbest thing I've ever said. But first, this is going to happen. This video is made possible by a sponsorship from Brilliant, as well as financial support from my patrons on Patreon and viewers like you. If you'd like to help this channel grow, please consider subscribing. And now, a word from our sponsor, Brilliant. With Brilliant, science isn't something you watch, it's something you do. With their fun, interactive lessons in math, science, data, and programming, Brilliant lets you dive into learning in the most effective way possible, by providing hands-on education that's designed to stick to your brain. And you don't have to take my word for it. Brilliant's lessons are designed by a team of award-winning experts from places like Microsoft, MIT, and Caltech. So you know you're learning from the best. And the best part is, they're offering my subscribers a chance to try everything they have to offer absolutely free for a full 30 days, plus 20% off an annual subscription to Brilliant Premium. And all you have to do to get it is go to brilliant.org/Forrest Valkai or use the link down in the description. Personally, I always recommend new users start out with their scientific thinking course. Whether you're a new learner or a seasoned scholar, it offers fresh perspectives on the world around you and supercharges your curiosity. So get started today by going to brilliant.org/Forrest Valkai, scanning the QR code on the screen, or using the link in the description. Remember, you'll get 30 days off unlimited learning for free and 20% off an annual subscription to Brilliant Premium when you use my link. Thank you so much to Brilliant for sponsoring this video, as well as to my patrons on Patreon, my channel members here on YouTube, and to all of my viewers.
Is it just me, or does a 100-pound wolf-like creature turning into a 360,000-pound blue whale seem a little hard to believe?
This might have been a compelling way to start this video if literally every single video in this series hadn't started with Jane saying, "Is it just me?" and then a completely ridiculous statement that just demonstrates that the writers of this series don't know anything about anything. You've broken our trust too many times, Jane. At this point, you're just the boy who cried creationism.
Who's got you covered?
Oh, you got burgers. Oh man, I love you.
Yeah, well, I figured that since we're gonna be studying anyways.
Oh yeah, pretty much. All right, let's see what you got here.
I think the worst part of these John and Jane videos, besides what they are, has to be the Chekhov's gun at the beginning of every episode. Oh, you can't sort your makeup? I guess you can't sort animals either. Oh, you can't see? Oh, I guess evolution doesn't work because it's a blind process. Oh, you got a dusty old trunk, probably a dead guy in there. Like, every single one of these videos is just so campy and gimmicky, and it has that awful sterilized feeling of something that had to pass through the family-friendly poop is a four-letter word filter of the little church basement studio from whence it was spawned. There's no passion to it, you know? There's no feeling. The whole series has all the high-octane excitement of a cereal commercial. And when I say cereal, I mean cornflakes, and made for the exact reason that Dr. Kellogg invented cornflakes. Except corn is too phallic, so it's just bran. And it's not even bran flakes, because flakes are also too provocative somehow, so it's just bran. It's just bran. And the mascot is a bar of soap. That's what these videos feel like to me. Anyway, let's hear more about John's greasy sack.
We got the old macaroni fries.
We got some burgers!
Silverware? For burgers?
I don't know, the girl who was giving all this stuff out was like a zombie.
You know that was somebody's big break. 100%. That was the director's niece who gets to put this on her resume for acting school now. Although, all jokes aside, Zombie Burger does sound like a fun idea and an awesome restaurant.
So, you know what's gonna be on this test, right?
Yeah, whale evolution. Can you imagine what it would take for a wolf-like creature to turn into a whale? The little tail would have to turn into a gigantic fluke, and the forelimbs would have to turn into flippers.
they would need to evolve a brand new respiratory system. I mean, that's not easy.
It's also not true. There are around 90 species of cetaceans, which are dolphins, whales, and porpoises, and they have the exact same respiratory system as you or me. The only real difference is that their nostrils are in a different place. We can even see the nasal aperture, or the hole in your skull with your nose in front of it and your airway behind it, moving over time as we look across the fossil record. But of course, John and Jane have previously advocated for the idea that the entire fossil record was created all at once during the global flood, which means they believe that all of those proto-whales all existed at the same time, showing all those different placements of the nasal aperture all at once, and then they all died in the right order to make it look like that nasal aperture was moving across the skull in only one direction, and that the only whales that survived the flood were the ones that had it in the position that we see today. All I'm saying is, if John and Jane are going to sit here and say that having your nostrils in a slightly different place constitutes a brand new respiratory system, and that makes evolution unbelievable, then surely they would also reject the claim that there were actually several brand new respiratory systems that all existed all at once in the same ocean, and then they all died except for just one of them, which we happen to see in a diverse variety of different whales. But then again, that would require critically analyzing the claims made by creationists, which is something that creationists never do.
And then they would have to evolve a blowhole.
You also have a blowhole, Jane. It's right there in the front of your face. Toothed whales have one blowhole, baleen whales have two blowholes, but all that is the opening of the nasal aperture, just like your nose. Even in the one blowhole situation, the actual holes in the skull are bifurcated so that one hole becomes two holes internally. As for the anatomy of the blowhole itself, they do have a dedicated muscle, which is for opening the blowhole. When that muscle is relaxed, the blowhole is closed so they don't get water in it, and then when they flex that muscle, it opens the blowhole up so they can breathe. And incidentally, you also have a dedicated muscle for widening your nostrils. It's called nasalis, and it does the exact same job. The point is, blowholes are pretty cool, and they're very interesting, and they're certainly pretty unique, but for John and Jane to act like they're this insane adaptation that never could have possibly evolved is just silly. They're literally just modified noses.
And then their teeth would have to evolve into baleen.
Teeth did not evolve into baleen. Baleen is actually a completely different thing that's made of keratin, which is the same stuff that makes your fingernails and your hair. There are a couple of different hypotheses for how baleen took the place of teeth. Modern evidence strongly suggests that the earliest mysticetes, or baleen whales, actually had teeth and baleen at the same time and were able to use their teeth for hunting and then the baleen for filtering. We can see in the fossils of the earliest baleen whales that they did in fact have teeth, and even in the embryos of modern baleen whales, we can see that they grow teeth and then reabsorb them and grow baleen plates in their place. This little dance of development and reabsorption is super common in embryology. You have several structures on your body that you developed and then reabsorbed as well, but it's especially striking in whales who also develop hind limb buds and then reabsorb them as well. So it's not like each of these little teeth had to somehow change into 1,000 hair-like structures by some random chance. All they had to do was just not grow. And then the stuff that makes baleen was there anyway because it happens to be the same stuff that makes hair and fingernails and scales and feathers. It's just the same chemical doing different stuff, sort of like how carbon makes diamonds and also graphite. All of this is very cool, but it's nowhere near as magical as John and Jane want you to believe.
And that's not all.
Wow, there are way too many changes that would have to be made.
So here we get this long list of cetacean adaptations that's meant to look so lengthy and so specific that it's obvious that all these things couldn't have possibly evolved. The problem is, nothing on that list is all that shocking. Hippos also have intra-abdominal testes. They make sense for temperature regulation if you're an aquatic mammal with little to no fur. Just about every clade you can think of has distinct vertebra that you would assume are spectacular if you didn't know how vertebra work. The most notable thing about whale vertebra is they don't have a distinct sacrum. Flukes are just modified tails. Sirenians, like manatees, have them too. It is a novelty, but there are a lot of those in nature. Consider, for example, centipede fangs, which are modified legs, or cactus spines, which are modified leaves. Lots of animals have blubber for insulation, and not all of them are even whales. Seals, polar bears, and penguins have blubber too. This is not all that unique, it just makes sense if you live in cold water. Lots of animals drink seawater. Whales get all the fresh water they need from the food that they eat, and the relatively little bit of seawater they ingest is inconsequential because they have really good kidneys that got better and better at osmoregulation over the course of their evolution as they moved from land to freshwater to saltwater. Lots of animals can give birth in the breech position. For whales, it's actually important because birthing is a relatively long process, so having the blowhole be one of the last things to emerge means the calf won't drown before delivery is finished. It's also important for the baby to flop its tail around and learn to swim before it's even fully born. Also, whales used to give birth on land, so this didn't have to be a sudden transition. Nursing underwater doesn't work the same way as nursing on land. Whale milk is about the same consistency as toothpaste, and it comes out from a slit in the mother's abdomen rather than a nipple. Calves also help with this process by rolling their tongue into a tube to facilitate drinking as much as they can. Penguins and sea turtles also adapted their front limbs into flippers, snakes and legless lizards also reduced their hind limbs, and whales did not lose their pelvis. In fact, not only do they have a pelvis, some species still have a femur, a tibia, and a fibula bone as well, all of which is great evidence for evolution. Whale reproductive organs are no more different from those of other mammals than those of any other mammals are from each other. Here's a cladogram showing the diversity of just the female reproductive tract across mammals, and it shows a ton of variation. But if you look closely, you'll see that the uterus of cetaceans is quite similar to that of ungulates. Not shown here is that cetaceans and artiodactyls, which are a type of ungulate, also have the same type of placenta, which makes perfect sense because whales evolved from artiodactyls. If you really want to talk to me about weird reproductive organs, let's talk about kangaroos, which have 2 uteruses and 3 vaginas, one of which closes up when not in use. Whale skin is incredibly thick and hairless, which is a relatively small adaptation compared to the other stuff on this list. Lung surfactants are a specialized lipid protein complex that help increase oxygen absorption through the lungs, and literally everything with lungs has them. We already talked about the blowhole and modified teeth. You can't just bring them up, say also, and then bring them up again. Light works differently underwater than above it, and while lots of animals have specialized eyes for seeing underwater, whales have much better hearing than they have eyesight because they echolocate, and a lot of them swim so deep that there is little or no light around them, which means sight wouldn't be terribly useful anyway. Using the phrase reorganize skull, bones, and muscles to distinguish a different animal is about as useful as just saying the words different animal. Literally every kind of animal has reorganized skull, bones, and muscles. And if you think having different skull bones is weird, just wait till you see literally any 2 species of fish. Lots of animals have modified ear bones, including pretty much everything with ears that burrows underground. The way your ear bones connect to your skull tells us a lot about what kind of environment you're living in. Humans also have a decoupled esophagus and trachea. They run parallel for a while, but they are different structures that only meet at the opening of the pharynx. All whales did was move the opening of the airway so that the nasopharynx is at the top of the head as opposed to the oropharynx in the back of the throat. We have both of those pharynxes too, they're just touching. Good gravy. Y'all need to learn some biology.
Including growing several hundred times bigger.
Yeah, like Aunt Madge during Christmas.
Wow, a fat joke. Classy move, apologetics group. Although I should say, having a joke like that in a video about evolution is a perfect fit, because the practice of shaming someone's body for a cheap laugh should be extinct.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to study. I mean, if we don't, this test is gonna be an epic fail.
Listen, I'm not exactly known for being on top of pop culture, but phrases like epic fail had already gone out of style by the time I graduated high school in 2010. This video was published in 2016, and now, at the end of 2024, it feels like I just opened a time capsule from the Bush administration. I don't know how I feel about trying to keep the spirit of 2008 alive.
Hey, you know what I'm thinking?
That we're really living on a snowflake in Whoville.
No. But cramming all these facts into our heads makes me feel like we're some sort of contestants on Jeopardy.
Welcome to Evolutionary Jeopardy, the game where you never know how things will turn out.
Wait a minute, are we not doing the burger gimmick? Or is this like a gimmick inside of a gimmick? Are we about to get double gimmicked? Is this gimmickception? Get it? They did an old meme, and now I'm doing an old meme. They brought back epic fail, and now I'm gonna bring back blankception because it's a meme from around that time. Wait, they're having cheeseburgers. I can has cheeseburger.
Here, kitty, you can has cheeseburger.
Jane, pick your category.
I'm gonna go for whale of a tail for 500.
Okay, from the high school biology textbook, we see the first animal believed to begin evolving into whales. It says, Masoni kids are one hypothesized link between modern whales and certain hoofed animals.
Oh, what is the imagined category of animals that includes sheep, camels, pigs, cows, deer, and wolves, thought to be the possible ancestors of whales?
That is correct!
Holy crap, there is so much wrong there. First of all, mesonychids were hoofed carnivores. Whales evolved from hoofed herbivores. Mesonychids are sometimes called wolves with hooves, but that's just a silly way of referring to them. Their family does not include wolves, nor indeed does it include any of the other animals that Jane just listed, because all of those other animals were artiodactyls, meaning they were even-toed ungulates, whereas mesonychids were odd-toed ungulates like horses and rhinoceroses. Now, if you replace the word mesonychid with the word artiodactyl and also remove wolves from the group, then what Jane just said actually makes a lot more sense, minus the parts about it being imaginary. And that is because whales evolved from artiodactyls, and there's a lot of ways that we can know that. Whales have multi-chambered stomachs, like the kind that we see in herbivores that live on land, like their ancestors were. They also have a particularly thick inner wall of their auditory bulla called an involucrum. That involucrum is found in modern whales, in all fossil ancestors of whales, and in no other living or fossil animals on Earth. There's also another distinctive bone in the ankle called the astragalus, which is homologous to the human talus bone, but in artiodactyls it has a very distinctive double pulley shape. It is found in Indohyus, which is the terrestrial common ancestor of cetaceans, and also in all fossil cetaceans that still have ankles. We're going to talk about more evidence for whale evolution as this video progresses, but even right now, you could put all that information together and ask yourself, if whales didn't evolve from land animals, why do they have the same super specific inner ear bone, a stomach that's usually used for munching on grass, and the ankles of a deer? Now, before we go any further, let's take a second to go back and grapple with what their book was saying. Because remember, it wasn't just their claim that mesonychids were the ancestors of all whales, it was their book's claim. And if you look more carefully at this paragraph in the book, it says that mesonychids are one hypothesized link between modern whales and certain hoofed animals. And right below that it says, some scientists favor an alternative hypothesis linking whales to other ancestral hoofed animals, which are also ancestral to hippos and pigs. The artiodactyl hypothesis of whale evolution has been around since the 90s, but it wasn't until the mid-2000s that Indohyus was discovered and solidified whales as artiodactyls. So this is probably just an older textbook that is accurately and honestly reporting the competing hypotheses of its time. And that's what's so important to remember about science, is that we always and only go where the evidence is pointing. If we don't have enough evidence to say something definitively yet, then we're honest about the fact that there are multiple possibilities until we get more evidence that allows us to reject one. Remember, you never accept a hypothesis. You only fail to reject it.
Wait, the entire evolutionary ancestry of whales is based on an imaginary creature?
Yeah.
That's true.
And that is a completely different wrong statement. Jane's original claim was that mesonychids were a group of animals, but what she, John, and this palm cockatoo just said is that it is a single animal which gave rise to a completely different group of ungulates and a canine, and is just assumed to be the ancestor of all whales. So the writers just took two different hypotheses which they couldn't tell apart, and the silly common name of wolves with hooves, which they couldn't tell wasn't serious, and mashed them all together into one horrible straw man of evolution. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If the people who made these videos actually read the materials that they were trying to debunk, they would never say half of the crap that they do.
Jane?
I'm gonna go with Howling for the Sea for 1,000.
Your biology textbook also shows a diagram of a whale evolving. It depicts the next creature in the lineup, which was discovered in the 1980s. They only discovered partial fragments of the wolf-like skull, and since they didn't have the rest of the body, they imagined that it was an intermediate between a land animal and a whale. And textbooks included illustrations of it swimming in the ocean. But then more fossils were discovered, showing it to be nothing more than a land animal. John.
What is Pachycetus?
Correct!
Okay, so at this point they're just lying and no one is surprised. Pachycetus was the first mostly terrestrial cetacean ancestor that we ever found, and the reconstruction that we have of it is based on several fossils, not just one. The very first Pachycetus specimen was found back in the 1980s, and it did contain just a few skull fragments. But since then, we have found hundreds and hundreds of Pachycetus fossils showing more and more parts of these animals' bodies. The reconstructions shown in modern biology textbooks are from very complete specimens found in the 2000s. And it just so happens that when you compare those modern reconstructions from these modern fossils with the original reconstructions from the original skull fragments, There aren't really that many major differences, and that is because paleontology is not just guesswork. You can glean a surprising amount of information from just a few fossil fragments. If you show me even half of the jawbone of any primate, I can tell you what it ate, how it walked, whether or not it had a tail, and whether or not that tail was prehensile. If you don't know comparative anatomy, that all sounds impossible. But if you understand science, it's easy. As for Pakicetus, it was primarily a land animal, but it certainly swam quite a lot. It has several adaptations, which are similar to those that we see in other semi-aquatic mammals, like having super dense bones in its limbs, just like what we see in hippopotamuses. And also, hippopotamuses are also artiodactyls, and also genetic testing in the 90s revealed that hippopotamuses are the closest living semi-aquatic relatives to whales. And just one more thing that I don't think I've ever heard any creationist even mention is that Pakicetus isn't just one animal. Pakicetus is the genus. There are 4 different species of Pakicetus, and just like with any other genus, if we don't know something about one of them, we can just look to one of the other species and get some clues. So even if we did know as little as what John and Jane are claiming about this one species of Pakicetus, we certainly wouldn't know nothing. The point is, Pakicetus isn't just some random animal that we crammed into a space on our imaginary timeline. Pakicetus fits the bill for a whale ancestor, so we call it one.
Your pick, John.
Same category.
It's time for the Daily Double. If you answer this right, John, you'll get double the amount.
Double the amount of what? There was no conclusion to that sentence. Also, that's not how a daily double works. You're supposed to wager an amount of money that you already have, and then that's how much you win if you get the answer right, so you can double your money. These people don't know how Jeopardy works because if they watch Jeopardy, they might accidentally learn something.
The limb structure of this creature called walking whale suggests that these animals could both swim in shallow water and walk on land. However, it appears to be nothing more than a land animal. In other words, it was defined as a walking whale. Not because it had a whale's tail or flippers or a blowhole, but simply because they believed it to be. In fact, they didn't even find the part of the skull that would have a blowhole.
What is ambulocetus?
You are correct!
Once again, that's a whole lot of slander built upon just a little bit of misunderstanding. Ambulocetus lived an amphibious lifestyle, which doesn't mean that it could breathe underwater like a frog. It just means that it spent a tremendous amount of time in the water and a little bit of time out of the water as well, exactly how pinnipeds, seals and sea lions and stuff, do today. Except their head was a little bit more like a crocodile than a seal. It also has the same inner ear bone and the same ankle bone, and as far as the position of the nostrils is concerned, we can see the positions in species just before and just after them, so it's not really difficult to figure out where they would have been in the middle. More importantly, however, bones alone are not the only way to tell the life history of an animal. And to understand what I mean by that, you need to understand isotopes. Atoms contain protons, neutrons, and electrons. The protons are what determine what element the atom belongs to, so carbon will always have 6 protons. 7 protons isn't heavy carbon, it is nitrogen. 5 protons isn't light carbon, it is boron. Isotopes are atoms of the same element, so they have the same number of protons, but they vary in their number of neutrons. Some numbers of neutrons make the atom unstable, or what we call radioactive. Other numbers are stable. These stable isotopes don't decay the same way that radioisotopes do, but because they vary ever so slightly in weight, they're going to move through the world in different and predictable ways. So for example, water made with heavy oxygen isotopes is going to evaporate slightly slower and precipitate slightly faster than water with light oxygen isotopes. When an animal eats or drinks or breathes or whatever, some of the atoms that it brings into its body will become incorporated into its tissues, including its skeleton if it has one. So when we find a fossil, we can test that fossil for stable isotopes, and the ratio of heavy to light isotopes gives us a sort of chemical record of the environment in which that animal lived and the sort of things that it got up to when it was alive. When we measure the ratios of stable oxygen isotopes in the earliest whale ancestors like Endohyus and Pakicetus, as well as modern freshwater dolphins, we see that they consumed a lot of fresh water. And when we look at later species in whale evolution, like Georgocetus and modern marine whales, we see they consume a lot more salt water. But when we look at Ambulocetus, we see those isotope signatures smeared all the way across the chart, with certain tissues of certain fossils registering as more saltwater or more freshwater or something in between. This suggests that Ambulocetus either lived in brackish waters or that it moved between salt and freshwater at different times in its life, probably as a migratory thing. Either way, this is clearly a transition between semi-aquatic freshwater cetaceans and fully aquatic saltwater cetaceans. This is not just some random dog thing with weird legs that we're calling a whale. This is very clearly a semi-aquatic mammal that is taking in way more salt water than any land animal should be.
Wow, that's some serious circular reasoning.
Jane, your entire message is that the Bible is true because the Bible says that it's true. I wouldn't be accusing anybody of circular reasoning if I was you.
John.
I'll go with whale of a tail for 3,000.
This creature is often depicted in museum and textbooks with a tail fluke. However, they never found the fossil bones for their tail.
The picture that you just showed does not depict a tail fluke, nor does the phylogenetic tree that I use. What are we doing?
What is Rhodocetus?
Correct!
Hallelujah.
Hey! I think this is my thought bubble.
Who cares?
Can we all agree that John is just the frickin' worst? They write him to be schooling Jane in every single episode, and now when she's finally getting ahead, he's just robbing her of her achievements in broad daylight. Writers have to make sure that young women remember their place in all things, even fantasy Jeopardy. Can't have them get used to the idea of winning.
Moving on. This creature seems to be nothing more than an extinct sea creature.
You will never guess what all extinct whales are.
What appears to be leftover legs from evolution actually turns out to be claspers used during mating season. This is true in many current species of whales.
This is not true of any species of whales, modern or otherwise, because no species of whales have claspers. Claspers are something that you see on sharks and stingrays. So to say that whales have them would be making the case for some truly remarkable convergent evolution. Now, it is true to say that a whale's pelvis serves as an anchoring point for several genital muscles and is used during mating, and that's why they haven't completely lost their pelvis the same way that they've lost many of their leg bones and all of their foot bones. And creationists love to point to that and say that this is not actually anything vestigial, it's all just intentional design. The problem with that is that we see this trend of using the pelvis in this way going back 40 million years. Also, in case you're curious, there's a word for that sort of thing in evolution. We call it an exaptation. An exaptation is when you take a structure that is no longer being used for its original purpose and co-opt it for a different purpose. Just like feathers, which were initially for insulation and are now used for flight, or penguin wings, which were initially for flight and are now used for swimming. As for the claim of the tiny Basilosaurus legs being used as claspers, I have no idea where they would have gotten that besides their own imaginations.
Last one. This creature appears to be nothing more than an extinct whale. John.
What is Durodon?
Excellent!
Did anybody else notice that we're not even picking questions anymore? When we last saw the board, there were still 26 questions to go, and now we're just ending the segment because the writers couldn't come up with 30 things they didn't know about whales. Also, Durodon was a whale and is extinct, so yeah, it's an extinct whale, which means exactly as much nothing as when John and Jane claimed that Lucy was just an extinct ape, as if anybody was arguing that she wasn't extinct or wasn't an ape. More importantly, however, Durodon shows us some really cool transitions between ancient whales and modern whales, like, for example, the fact that they had differently shaped teeth, with sharp incisors in the front and shearing molars in the back, exactly like what you would see with land animals, specifically herbivores like artiodactyls. Modern members of Odontocetes, or toothed whales, have uniform peg-like teeth, and Mysticetes, or baleen whales, don't have any teeth at all. So yeah, Durodon is an extinct whale, and it shows transition during evolution. Congratulations, you just lost an argument you were having with yourself.
And the last two remaining names, Mysticetes and Odontocetes, are just modern whales, baleen and toothed whales respectively.
Correct. And also, all of the members of those two groups have all of the genes necessary for smelling above water, which is very different than smelling below water. only most of those genes are silenced. They are epigenetically turned off. Do you ever wonder why that is? Do you think that maybe it might have something to do with, like, evolving from land animals or something? I don't know. Also, I just want to be super clear here. Mysticetes and Odontocetes are not the names of whales. They're the names of groups of whales. Mysticetes are baleen whales. Odontocetes are toothed whales. You can hear that word daunt, like teeth, in there. He did kind of say that at the end, but the way that he started that sentence by calling those names threw me off a little bit. It makes me wonder if he actually knows what he just said.
Well, John, it looks like you've won! You've won our grand prize. It's a...
New car?
No, a cold hamburger.
What? A cold hamburger?
Cold hamburger, John. A cold
Hamburger John. John. Hello? John? Your burger's getting cold.
Oh, good. We're back to the burger thing. Does that mean that we can get back to the memes from my high school days as well?
What's up with the silverware? Your perfectionism kicking in again?
No. No, these are arranged in an evolutionary story. See, we start with a knife that eventually evolves a round end to become a spoon. And then over time, some notches form into it, and it becomes a spork. And eventually, a fork.
That's pretty good. Perhaps we can come up with some other theoretical evolutionary timelines, like, let's say, for example, one in which canines evolved into hominins, in which case you could, hypothetically, go up to one of them and say, "You're the man now, dog."
I think your problem is that each of these utensils is designed for a very specific purpose.
Exactly, and just like the whale chart, each of these animals were created by God to be exactly what it is.
I touched on this briefly at the beginning, but that would mean that God created all of those creatures exactly as they were so that he could kill them, along with over 99% of all the other species on Earth. The implication of creation is one of wanton destruction and insane cruelty.
And Genesis 1:21 says, "So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good."
And Genesis 19:36 says, "And so both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father." It's about incest. Again. Only this time, it's because God had just got done destroying 2 entire cities full of people because they were all just so sinful, but he spared Lot and his family because Lot was such a good person, despite the fact that he had literally just offered up his 2 virgin daughters to be raped to death by an angry mob. And so Lot and his family get to flee the city, but then God turns Lot's wife into a pillar of salt for the crime of looking over her shoulder. And Lot and his daughters couldn't even go back to grieve her, otherwise they would be turned into pillars of who knows what spice. And so they decide to set up camp in the mountains nearby, and instead of looking for other cities literally anywhere else, they decide the best thing to do is to rebuild civilization right then and there with just the 3 of them. And so the daughters get Lot drunk and then rape him, which I guess they learned about rape from him, so they probably thought it was okay. Anyway, that's where the Moabites and the Ammonites come from for the rest of the Bibles, from the incestuous date rape of 3 genocide survivors. I mean, seriously, have you read this fucking thing?
So, when you line up a theoretical ancestor, a couple of extinct land animals, an extinct sea creature, an extinct whale, and a couple of modern whales, you can tell a pretty good story about how a 100-pound wolf-like creature turned into a 360,000-pound blue whale. But it don't make it true.
It's true. Kind of makes you think, doesn't it?
What is that, a sardine? Ugh. I was worried about what was going on in your mind, dude, but what's going on in that sandwich? Go flop that thing at somebody else. I feel like I say this almost every time we watch a John and Jane video, but that was the worst one yet. There were so many things in there that were half-truths, misrepresentations, or just straight-up fabrications, and there were several times where they took a bunch of different stuff that they didn't understand and squished it all together to make something that was uniquely wrong. However, if you don't know anything about whales or about evolution, all that confusion mixed up with all the times that they lie about how scientists never actually found anything, could be pretty compelling. I host several live call-in shows where creationists call me to challenge me on evolution, and I've heard arguments a lot like these several times from everyday people who are convinced by this kind of nonsense. For that reason, I'm gonna give this one a science teacher challenge level 4 out of 10. You need a little bit more than just basic common sense to get through it, but if you've had any formal training in biology, you'll be just fine. I've still got some open spots on my upcoming trips to Malaysia, so if you want to go with me to go see some orangutans and sun bears and elephants and proboscis monkeys, then be sure to use the link in the description to sign up for that. I've got a long list of videos on the docket, and I'm doing my best to keep up with all of them, so if you want to see those videos when they come out, please make sure to subscribe. It's easy, it's free, and it really does help me out in a lot of ways. And if you really like my work and you want to support it further, please consider joining my Patreon for some nice perks, or becoming a channel member for some nice emojis. The more members I get, the more emojis I can release, and I have a few special ones that I want to put out there. And with that, I'm Forrest Valkai. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and all the other stuff you do here on YouTube. Please exit through the gift shop on your way out, pick up one of these sweet t-shirts. Have an awesome rest of your day, and never stop learning. Bye-bye. What is that, a sardine?